The letter hit Ezekiel Turner's kitchen table like a verdict from a court he had never agreed to appear before, and the woman standing in his doorway was nothing like what he had imagined when he signed his name to that advertisement 6 months ago. "You sent for a hard worker," Kate Covington said, her voice steady as iron, her dark eyes burning with something that was equal parts fury and pride. "I am standing here, Mr. Turner. I suggest you decide in the next 30 seconds whether you are going to honor your word, or whether you are going to be the kind of man who breaks a promise to a woman who traveled 900 miles to keep hers." Ezekiel stood with one hand on the doorframe, dust from the Nevada flats still caught in the grooves of his knuckles, his jaw locked tight. He had expected someone softer, someone who would take one look at the cracked earth of his homestead, the half-collapsed barn, the cattle that were already beginning to thin from the drought, and be grateful simply to have a roof and a husband. He had written in his advertisement, plain as daylight, that he needed a woman capable of hard work, a woman who could endure the West, a woman who would not complain. Kate Covington, standing in his doorway in a travel-worn brown dress with a trunk behind her and a medical bag in her hand, had just informed him, in language so precise it could have been drafted by a lawyer, that she had organized a women's labor cooperative back in Ohio, had trained under a physician for 3 years, had negotiated crop prices for 40 farming families, and that she intended to do more for his land than he had ever managed to accomplish alone. He had not expected that. He had expected a wife who could work hard. He had no idea that she was about to redefine what hard work looked like entirely. The air between them crackled with secrets neither had yet told. Ezekiel had his own dark past, a betrayal so deep it had turned him away from people entirely, and driven him to this solitary stretch of Nevada desert, where the wind was the only company that never disappointed him. And Kate, with her careful eyes and her controlled breathing and her hand gripping that medical bag just a little too tightly, carried a hidden motive that had nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with survival. Neither of them knew, standing in that scorching June doorway in 1878, that the trap they each believed they had set for the other would become the very thing that saved them both. It had begun 6 months earlier, in the winter of 1877, when Ezekiel Turner sat down at the rough-hewn table he had built himself and wrote the most honest advertisement of his life. He was 31 years old. He had come to the Nevada Territory in 1873 with a business partner named Caleb Marsh and a dream of building something real on the land that the federal government was opening up for homesteaders following the Homestead Act. The land was brutal and honest in a way that Ezekiel had always appreciated. It did not pretend to be anything it was not. It was dry and cracked and merciless, and every single thing you wanted to grow out of it required a kind of ferocious persistence that most men could not sustain. Ezekiel had sustained it. For 4 years, he had poured every dollar and every hour and every ounce of his strength into the Turner homestead on the eastern flats outside the town of Harlan's Crossing, a small community of about 300 souls that had sprung up around a trading post and a water source that was becoming less reliable every year. He had built his house with his own hands. He had dug his own well, driven his own cattle, planted his own fields in the short wet season and watched most of them die in the long dry one. He had done all of it beside Caleb Marsh, who was supposed to be his partner, his friend, the other half of the venture they had shaken hands on in Cincinnati before either of them had ever seen a Nevada sunset. And then Caleb had taken the money. Not all of it. Caleb was clever enough not to take everything at once, because everything at once would have been too obvious. He had taken it in pieces over 18 months, quietly redirecting income from the cattle sales into an account in his own name in Carson City, falsifying the ledger entries in handwriting close enough to Ezekiel's that a judge had looked at the evidence and called it a complicated dispute between partners rather than a clear act of theft. By the time Ezekiel understood the full scope of the betrayal, Caleb Marsh was gone. The account was empty, and the homestead that was supposed to belong to both of them had 3 liens on it that Ezekiel had not known existed. He had spent 2 years paying those liens down. He had sold cattle, had taken work in Harlan's Crossing hauling freight and mending fences, and doing whatever labor was available, had eaten less and slept shorter and worked longer than any man around him because the alternative was losing the land, and the land was the one thing that had not betrayed him. But by the winter of 1877, he had reached the limit of what one man could do alone. The drought was getting worse. The cattle needed more hands to manage across the range. The south field, which had good soil if it could be irrigated properly, was lying fallow because there was no one to work it while he managed everything else. He needed help that he could trust, and after Caleb Marsh, trust was the one currency he had run entirely out of. A mail-order bride advertisement felt, to Ezekiel, like the most transactional and therefore the most honest arrangement he could make. No pretense of courtship. No hidden motives buried under charm and dinner invitations. A clear exchange of needs and expectations, written down, legally binding through the institution of marriage, and chosen by a woman who understood exactly what she was agreeing to. He had written it carefully. He had stated that he needed a woman of strong constitution who was not afraid of physical labor, who could manage a household, assist with cattle, tend a garden, and contribute to the running of a working homestead. He had stated that he was not a romantic man and did not intend to pretend otherwise, but that he would provide a stable home, protection, and fair partnership in the enterprise of the land. He had sent it to 3 newspapers. The Matrimonial News, which ran regularly out of San Francisco and had an eastern distribution, the Ohio Agricultural Weekly, and a small church newsletter in Columbus that his cousin had forwarded to him with a note saying that church women made the most reliable wives. He had received 11 responses. 10 of them were exactly what he expected. Women in difficult circumstances, widows or women of limited means, looking for security and willing to work for it. Their letters were earnest and practical. 2 of them mentioned being good cooks as their primary qualification. The 11th letter was Kate Covington. He had read it 3 times before he understood that she was not applying for the position so much as evaluating whether he was worth her time. She had written, in precise and educated handwriting, that she had read his advertisement and found it noteworthy for its honesty, which was rarer than it should have been among such postings. She had then outlined her own qualifications in terms that were so specific and so capable that Ezekiel had actually felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had no name for because it was a combination of admiration and discomfort in equal measure. She had trained for 3 years under Dr. Harriet Pembroke in Columbus, Ohio, developing medical skills that included wound treatment, childbirth assistance, fever management, and basic surgery. She had organized a cooperative of 43 farming families that had collectively negotiated grain prices with 3 separate buyers, increasing their average income by 31% over 2 seasons. She had managed her late father's farm accounts after his death until the farm was sold to settle debts, demonstrating that she was fully capable of reading, writing, and maintaining complex financial records. She was 28 years old. She was not looking for romance. She was, she stated plainly, looking for a situation that would allow her to be useful in ways that the city of Columbus, Ohio, in the year 1877, was not willing to permit a woman to be useful. She did not say why she needed to leave Columbus specifically. She did not mention what had happened to her late father's farm or how the debts had arisen. She did not explain the thin space between her lines where something important had been deliberately omitted. Ezekiel noticed the omission, but he had his own omissions, so he accepted the symmetry and wrote back offering to cover her travel costs and marry her in Harlan's Crossing upon her arrival in June of 1878. She had written back 1 week later with a single sentence, She would be on the westbound stage out of Salt Lake City on June the 14th, arriving in Harlan's Crossing on June the 17th, weather permitting. It had not been weather that complicated things. The stage arrived on the morning of June 18th, one day late, because it had been delayed at the station in Elko by an argument between the driver and the station agent over a matter of payment that had nothing to do with Kate Covington, but had kept her sitting in that station for 19 hours in the summer heat, with nothing to eat except what she had packed in her own bag, and nothing to do except watch the desert light change and decide whether she was making the worst mistake of her life. She had decided in those 19 hours that she was possibly making the second worst mistake of her life, but that the first worst had already been made in Columbus and was beyond correction, so she might as well continue westward. Ezekiel had been waiting at the stage depot in Harlan's Crossing since 7 in the morning. He was wearing the cleanest shirt he owned, which still had a faint stain at the collar from an encounter with a fence post 2 months prior. He had shaved, which he did not always bother to do. He was holding his hat in his hands because it felt wrong to wear it, and he had no idea what one did with one's hands when waiting for a woman one had agreed to marry but never met. He had been waiting for 6 hours when the stage rolled in. She stepped down from the coach before the driver had even set the step, dropping the 3 feet to the hard-packed earth with the ease of someone accustomed to managing her own body without assistance. She was taller than he had expected. Dark brown hair pinned back practically, rather than decoratively. Brown eyes that moved immediately to assess the street, the buildings, the people, cataloging everything with the methodical efficiency of someone who had learned that survival depended on knowing her surroundings quickly. She wore a dress that had once been good quality and was now well maintained rather than new. She carried the medical bag in one hand and had the presence of a woman who had been taking up exactly the amount of space she required for years without apology. She found him because he was clearly the only man in the street wearing a good shirt and holding his hat with the expression of a man who was deeply uncertain about his own decisions. "Mr. Turner," she said. "Miss Covington," he said. They looked at each other for a long moment, and both of them had the exact same thought, which was that this person was more complicated than they had bargained for, and that it was too late to reconsider. They were married that afternoon in the office of the local justice of the peace, a man named Harold Finch, who was also the post office administrator, and did not bother to make the ceremony feel like anything other than the legal transaction it was. 2 of the townswomen from the general store were their witnesses. Ezekiel said what was required of him. Kate said what was required of her. Harold Finch stamped a document and handed it to Kate rather than Ezekiel, which surprised everyone in the room including Ezekiel, but Kate accepted it without comment and put it in her medical bag. They drove back to the homestead in Ezekiel's wagon in near silence, and the near silence was interrupted only when Kate said, while looking at the landscape they were crossing, that she had read about Nevada Territory's drought conditions in the Ohio Agricultural Weekly and wanted to know whether he had considered the Comstock irrigation techniques that had been discussed in the spring edition. Ezekiel had not read the Ohio Agricultural Weekly. He had not considered the Comstock irrigation techniques because he did not know what they were. "I will explain them to you," Kate said, as if this were entirely ordinary, "after I have seen the land." They arrived at the homestead as the afternoon light was going gold and flat across the desert, and Kate got down from the wagon and stood in front of the house and the barn and the fields, and Ezekiel waited for her face to fall the way every person's face fell when they saw the reality of what he was offering. Her face did not fall. She looked at the south field and said it had good soil composition for the region. She looked at the barn and said the collapse was in the eastern wall and could be addressed with the right timber and bracing. She looked at the house and said it was sound and that she had lived in smaller. She looked at Ezekiel and said, "Show me the water situation." He showed her. The well was running lower than he liked. The small seasonal stream to the west that had once supplemented it was nearly dry. The cattle were being watered at a cost in time and effort that was becoming unsustainable. Kate listened to everything he told her without interrupting. Then she went into the house, sat at his kitchen table with a sheet of paper she took from her own bag, and began writing a list. He stood in the doorway watching her write, and for the first time in 2 years, something in him eased just slightly. The first morning was where the real confrontation happened. Ezekiel had certain assumptions about how the arrangement would function. He had imagined that Kate would manage the house, cook the meals, tend the kitchen garden, and occasionally assist with lighter tasks around the homestead. He had imagined that the division of labor would be comprehensible and traditional, and that he would retain overall decision-making authority over the enterprise of the land. He woke at dawn to find Kate already outside. She was not in the kitchen garden. She was in the south field. She had risen before him, had dressed practically in a divided skirt and work shirt that she had apparently packed specifically for this purpose, and had taken the surveying tools from his barn, which she had found without being shown where they were, and was walking the south field in a systematic pattern, making measurements and taking notes. He walked out there without his coffee, which he immediately regretted, and stood at the edge of the field. "What are you doing?" he said. "Surveying for irrigation channels," she said, not looking up. "The slope runs southeast to northwest at approximately a 3-degree grade. If we divert from the western stream bed, even at its current reduced flow, we can get water to this field through a gravity-fed channel system. It would require about 4 days of digging and some timber for the channel walls." "You cannot dig irrigation channels," Ezekiel said. Kate stopped writing and looked at him. "That is interesting," she said, with the careful tone of someone who was managing a very specific kind of patience, "because I have my surveying measurements right here, which suggests that I have already begun." "I meant that it is not your job," he said, and then heard himself say it, and understood immediately that it was the wrong framing entirely. "You sent for a wife who could work hard," Kate said. She folded her notebook with the measured precision of someone who had been making this particular argument for most of her adult life. "I am working hard. If you have a specific objection to the irrigation project itself, I would like to hear it on its merits. If your objection is to the fact that I am outside and not in your kitchen, then we need to discuss something more fundamental about what this arrangement actually means." The silence between them stretched long and hot under the morning Nevada sky. Ezekiel had spent 2 years making every decision on this land alone. He had developed the reflex of control as a defense against the kind of betrayal that came from trusting the wrong person. And Kate was standing in his south field talking about irrigation channels, as if she had already decided what they were going to do, and every part of him that had been burned by Caleb Marsh wanted to push back. But the part of him that was honest, and Ezekiel Turner had always been, whatever his flaws, fundamentally honest, the part that was honest looked at what Kate was describing and understood that it was correct. The south field was the best land on the homestead, and it was lying fallow because he could not solve the water problem while managing everything else. She had identified the solution in her first 8 hours on the property. "Tell me more about the channel system," he said. She looked at him for a moment, recalibrating, and then she opened her notebook again and showed him. That was the beginning. Over the following 2 weeks, they worked on the irrigation project together, and Ezekiel found himself revising nearly every assumption he had made about who Kate Covington was and what she was capable of. She dug alongside him, not as a gesture of equality, but because the work genuinely needed 2 people, and she saw no logical reason why the 2 available people should not both dig. She knew how to read soil density. She had an instinct for gradient that he came to realize was not instinct at all but geometry, which she had taught herself from a book she had borrowed from a teacher in Columbus, who had agreed that she was exceptional, and then declined to admit her to any formal educational institution because she was a woman. She cooked meals in the evening that were competent and occasionally extraordinary, but she was visibly uninterested in cooking as her primary contribution. And Ezekiel noticed that the evenings when she was most animated were the ones when they sat at the kitchen table afterward and talked through the problems of the land, because those were problems she could solve in ways that mattered at scale. They talked through the cattle management question, and Kate proposed a rotation pattern that would reduce the daily water consumption demands by keeping different sections of the herd on different schedules. Ezekiel implemented it and watched it work. They talked through the financial situation, and this was where the secrets began to surface for the first time. Kate had asked to see the ledger, and Ezekiel had hesitated, and Kate had said, quietly and without accusation, "I organized financial records for 43 families. I am not going to steal from you, Mr. Turner. I am trying to help." He had given her the ledger. She had gone through it in one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a lamp turned high while he sat across from her pretending to mend tack and actually watching her face as she read. When she finished, she set the ledger down. "You have been paying for everything alone," she said. "I had a partner," he said, and stopped. She waited. He told her about Caleb Marsh. Not everything, not the full scope of the humiliation and the rage and the long dark period in 1875 when he had not been entirely sure he was going to survive it without doing something that would have ended him in a different way. But he told her the facts, the partnership, the theft, the liens, the 2 years of rebuilding. Kate was quiet for a moment after he finished. "The advertisement said you needed a hard worker," she said. "Yes. You needed more than that," she said. "You needed someone you could trust." The word trust sat between them like something fragile, and neither of them moved toward it yet. "What about you?" he said. She looked at the lamp flame. "My father died in 1875, she said. "He had debts I did not know about, not from dishonesty, from bad luck in a drought season in Ohio in 1874 that destroyed 2 years of crops. When he died, the creditors came and the farm went, and I used my medical training to earn money for 2 years, and then I used my cooperative organizing work to earn money for another year, and then—" She stopped. "And then," he said. "And then a man named Gregory Holt, who was the buyer for the largest grain cooperative in central Ohio, decided that a woman who could organize 43 farming families was dangerous to his business model and would be better positioned as his wife than as an independent operator. He made that known to the families I worked with. He made it known in ways that were very effective. By January of 1878, none of the families would work with me anymore because they were afraid of what it would cost them with Gregory Holt if they did." Ezekiel was very still. "He forced you out," he said. "He forced a choice," Kate said. "Marry him and become useful to his interests, or become unemployable in central Ohio. I chose a third option, which was your advertisement in the matrimonial news." "You fled," he said, and there was no judgment in it, only recognition, because he knew something about fleeing toward land when the alternative was unbearable. "I left with a plan," Kate corrected him, and there was something so fierce and so carefully controlled in the correction that Ezekiel felt it physically, like something striking the center of his chest. After that conversation, something shifted between them. It was subtle and it was structural, the way the ground shifts slightly after a deep rain, everything still in the same place, but the relationship between the surfaces changed. They stopped being two people conducting a business arrangement and started being two people who knew each other's dark past, and the knowledge, rather than creating vulnerability, created something closer to alliance. Ezekiel stopped framing his decisions without consulting Kate. Not because he felt he was required to, but because he had found, in 3 weeks of working alongside her, that her judgment was better than his in approximately half of all situations, and that the situations where his judgment was better were the ones involving cattle and physical terrain, while the ones where hers was better were the ones involving planning, numbers, negotiation, and medical emergency. The medical emergency arrived in the form of a man named Pete Donovan, who was one of 3 hired hands Ezekiel employed through the summer branding season. Pete Donovan came in from the range on a Wednesday afternoon with a wound in his arm that was already showing the early signs of infection, the result of a barbed wire encounter that he had not mentioned to anyone for 4 days because he did not want to appear weak. He was feverish, and his arm was red and swollen, and he had the particular gray quality around the mouth that Kate recognized immediately as a sign that this was past the point of simple wound care. She took him into the house, sent Ezekiel to boil water and find the cleanest cloth on the property, and opened her medical bag. She cleaned the wound with carbolic acid solution, which she had packed specifically because Dr. Pembroke had emphasized its importance, and the medical community was still in the process of adopting the practices that Joseph Lister had been advocating in Britain. She debrided the infected tissue with the calm and focused efficiency of someone who had done this enough times to have divorced the act from the emotion. She administered laudanum from her bag for the pain. She dressed the wound with clean bandaging and explained to Pete, clearly and in terms that left no room for misunderstanding, that if he felt heat spreading up his arm or saw red lines moving from the wound, he was to tell someone immediately. Pete Donovan, who had initially looked at Kate with the particular expression of a man who did not think a woman should be doing this, left the house with his arm properly treated and his fever already beginning to break, and went back to the bunkhouse and told the other hands that Mrs. Turner was the best thing that had happened to the homestead since the well had been dug. Ezekiel had watched from the doorway during the treatment, not hovering, not interfering, but watching. When Pete was gone and Kate was cleaning her instruments, Ezekiel said, "You have done that many times." "Enough times," Kate said. "Dr. Pembroke," he said, "the one who trained you." "She practiced in Columbus for 20 years, Kate said. "She was the only female physician in the city and most of the male physicians refused to acknowledge her credentials, so she worked with the people who had no other options, poor families, women in difficult circumstances, farmers who could not afford the fee at the male practices. I assisted her for 3 years. "Why did you stop?" Kate paused in her cleaning. "Because she died," she said, "in the spring of 1876. And when she died, the practice died with her, because no institution in Columbus was willing to carry on the work of a woman physician regardless of how documented and effective her methods were." There was grief in it, buried deep under the factual presentation, and Ezekiel heard it. "She mattered to you," he said. "She showed me what it looked like to do something real in the world," Kate said. "She worked harder than anyone I have ever known, and she was never adequately recognized for it, and I decided when she died that I would not spend my life waiting to be recognized. I would simply do the work." He understood, hearing that, why she had pushed back so hard on that first morning when he had told her that irrigation was not her job. She was not pushing back against him specifically. She was pushing back against every version of that conversation she had ever had. "I apologize," he said, "for what I said that first morning." She looked at him. Something in her expression moved just slightly, like a curtain briefly lifted by a draft. "You did not mean it as badly as it sounded," she said. "I meant it as badly as my habits of thinking led me to mean it," he said, "which is different but not better." She put the last of her instruments in the medical bag and snapped it closed and looked at him with that assessing, direct gaze that he had come to understand was not coldness but focus. "We are both learning," she said. It was the most generous thing she could have said. They were married in June. By August, the Southfield irrigation channels were complete and functioning, drawing water from the seasonal stream bed in a system that Kate had designed with such precision that it worked at even the reduced flow the drought year was producing. The field was not yet planted as the season was too advanced, but it was prepared, and it was watered, and it would be ready in March. By September, the cattle herd was healthier. The bunkhouse had been re-roofed with Kate's organizational direction and the hands' labor, and Kate had begun seeing patients in Harlan's crossing 1 day per week. That last development was not Ezekiel's idea and was not entirely welcome at first. He came home from a cattle check on a Thursday to find a woman from town sitting at his kitchen table with a child who had a broken arm, waiting for Kate to finish mixing a poultice in the linta she had appropriated as a medical space. "Who let you in?" Ezekiel said, not unkindly, but with the flat surprise of a man who was not used to finding strangers in his house. "Your wife said we could wait inside," the woman said. She was about Kate's age, sandy-haired, with the weathered skin of someone who worked outdoors. "I am Miriam Holt. My son Daniel fell out of the hayloft." Kate came in from the lean-to and went immediately to Daniel, who was about 10 years old and trying very hard not to cry. Ezekiel stood back and watched Kate examine the arm, confirm the break, splint it with the efficiency and gentleness of someone who was equally good at both, and explained to Miriam the care required over the following weeks. Miriam paid her with a sack of dried beans and a wheel of hard cheese, because that was what she had. After they left, Ezekiel said, "You are running a medical practice." "I am providing medical care to people who need it," Kate said, "which is not exactly the same thing, but the distinction might not be apparent from where you are standing." "You did not tell me," he said. "I did not ask permission," she said, and there was the edge of that old fire in it. "I told you my qualifications when I wrote to you. This is one of those qualifications in use. If you have a practical objection, I am willing to hear it." The practical objection he had was that people were coming to his property without his knowledge, and the control reflex that Caleb Marsh had burned into him bristled at the unpredictability of it. He said so. He said it as honestly as he could, which was the closest he came to real vulnerability at that point in their arrangement. Kate looked at him for a long moment after he finished. "Caleb Marsh stole from you," she said, "and now every unpredictable thing feels like a precursor to another theft. I understand that. But Miriam Holt and her son with a broken arm are not Caleb Marsh, and I am not Caleb Marsh, and at some point the defense you built against him is going to cost you more than what it protects." The silence after that was different from previous silences. It had more weight. It had the weight of something true. "Will you tell me when you expect patients?" He said finally. "Yes," she said. "Then I have no practical objection," he said. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her face that was not the careful professional assessment she usually wore, but something softer and more uncertain, as if she had expected the conversation to go differently and the outcome had surprised her. "Thank you," she said. It came out quieter than her usual tone. "You earn your place here every day," he said. "You have since you arrived." He said it as a factual statement, and then realized from the way her breath changed that it had landed as something more than that. He went back outside because he did not know what to do with that, and spent the next 3 hours mending fence with more attention than the fence strictly required. September became October. The town of Harlan's Crossing had a problem that the town had been quietly carrying for 2 years, which was that its water supply was degrading faster than anyone wanted to admit. The same drought that was pressing on Ezekiel's homestead was pressing on the town's shared well, which served the 200 people who lived within the town proper, and the well was declining at a rate that, if continued, would render the town unviable within 5 years. The town had a mayor, a man named Douglas Carn, who had been elected primarily because he owned the general store and was therefore the most economically central figure in the community. He had been aware of the water problem for 18 months and had done nothing actionable about it, partly because he did not know what to do and partly because acknowledging the problem felt like admitting a failure of leadership that might cost him his commercial position. Kate learned about the water problem in October because her patients talked, and her patients were the people of Harlan's Crossing, and people say things to the person treating their medical complaints that they might not say in other contexts. She heard about the well from 3 separate patients in 3 consecutive weeks, each of whom mentioned it differently, and the pattern made her put the pieces together. She brought it to Ezekiel that evening, not as a report but as a problem she had already been thinking about. "The town's water supply is failing," she said, At current rate, it is unviable in 4 to 6 years. Mayor Karn knows and is not acting. Ezekiel was quiet for a moment. I know about the well, he said. I did not know the timeline. There is an underground water source approximately 2 miles north of the town, Kate said. It was surveyed by a federal geological party in 1871. The survey results are in the federal land office in Carson City. I have been corresponding with the land office. They have confirmed that the survey exists and that the source is significant. You have been corresponding with Carson City, Ezekiel said. Since August, Kate said. I did not mention it because I did not have enough information to bring to the conversation yet. Now I do. He absorbed this. The control reflex flickered and he let it pass. What would reaching the source require, he said. A community well project, Kate said. Deeper drilling than anyone has done in this area, which requires equipment that the town does not own, and a coordinated effort from the entire community because no individual family can fund it alone. Douglas Karn will not organize that, Ezekiel said. No, Kate agreed. But you could. He looked at her. I am not a community figure, he said. I have been here 5 years and I have kept to myself. That is why it would work, Kate said. You have no political stake in the outcome. You have no commercial interest to protect. And you have a wife who can do the financial analysis and coordination work, which means you do not have to do it alone. There it was again, that shift in the meaning of things. The word alone, which had been the defining condition of Ezekiel's life since Caleb left, and which Kate had now quietly begun to erode. They brought the water proposal to a town meeting in November of 1878, and it was the first town meeting Ezekiel Turner had attended since a property boundary dispute in 1876 that he had lost because he had no allies and Caleb Marsh had already left. Kate had prepared a presentation. She had tables of the geological survey data, translated from federal bureaucratic language into plain terms that farmers and shopkeepers could follow. She had cost estimates for the drilling equipment rental, the labor, and the materials, along with a proposed contribution structure based on household income that she had assembled from her knowledge of the town gathered through months of medical visits. Douglas Karn sat in the front row with the tight expression of a man watching someone else solve a problem he should have solved himself, and calculating whether that was a threat. It was a threat. But the 200 people in the meeting hall were more interested in the fact that the water problem had a solution than in the political dynamics of who had identified it. And Kate answered every question with the same focused clarity she brought to everything. And by the end of the evening, 63 households had committed to the contribution plan. On the walk home through the cold November dark, with the wagon wheel throwing up small sparks on the flint stones, Ezekiel said, "Where did you learn to do that?" "Organize a meeting," Kate said. "Talk to a room full of people who are half afraid and half resentful and make them agree with you anyway." Kate was quiet for a moment. "Cooperative," she said. "In Ohio, 43 families who all distrusted each other and distrusted any woman telling them anything. You learn very quickly that you cannot argue people into agreement when they are afraid. You have to show them that agreeing is safer than not agreeing. Is that what you did tonight? I showed them that the water problem was going to cost them everything if they left it alone," Kate said, "which is true. Then I showed them that addressing it together was affordable, also true. The agreement follows naturally from the honesty." "You make it sound simple," he said. "It is simple," she said. "It is not easy. There is a difference." He found himself smiling in the dark, which was something he had not done very often in recent years, and which felt strange and not unwelcome. It snowed in December, which was unusual for the Nevada flats but not unheard of, and the homestead became very close and very quiet in the way that winter imposes on land that is otherwise always in motion. The hired hands had gone, as was usual in the slow season. The cattle were on reduced range close to the house. The irrigation channels were dormant but intact. Kate had her medical room in the lean-to, and her patients came even through the cold. because illness does not observe the season, and she had acquired a reputation in Harlan's Crossing that was solid and specific in the way that good work always eventually produces reputation. They spent the evenings at the kitchen table, which had become their territory for everything that mattered. They talked through the spring planting plan, the cattle expansion that the healthier herd made possible, the continuing progress of the community well project. They read, which Ezekiel had done little of in his isolated years, but which Kate made seem necessary and natural, and she had a small collection of books in her trunk that she offered without making a production of offering them. He read a book on agricultural irrigation systems that she had brought from Ohio, and then he read a novel, which he had not done since Cincinnati, and then one evening in December, he read a passage aloud to her from the novel, because it described a landscape that resembled the Nevada desert in a way he found unexpectedly moving, and when he looked up from the page, she was watching him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was not the assessing look. It was not the professional focus. It was something open and unguarded, and it was there only for a moment before she composed herself, but he had seen it, and he understood for the first time that Kate Covington, who had organized cooperatives and negotiated prices and designed irrigation systems and treated broken bones, felt things very deeply and had simply gotten very good at not showing it. He did not say anything about it that evening. He was not ready. But in the days that followed, something changed in the texture of how they moved around each other. The careful professional distance, which had been a mutual protection against the vulnerability of their arrangement, began to lose its rigid edges. He found reasons to stay in the same room rather than going to opposite ends of the house. She found reasons to tell him things that were not strictly necessary to tell, small observations about the landscape or the patients or the animals that were not work information, but were the kind of thing you said to a person you wanted to be in conversation with. Christmas of 1878 arrived, and with it a letter. It came in the mail sack from the stage depot in Harlan's Crossing, delivered to the homestead by the mail rider who came through once a week. It was addressed to Kate Turner, which was her legal name and which she used professionally but which still looked strange on an envelope. It was postmarked Columbus, Ohio. She opened it in the kitchen while Ezekiel was outside, and by the time he came in, she was sitting very still at the table with the letter in her hands and her face arranged in the careful, composed expression she used when something had hit her hard enough to require suppression. "What is it?" he said immediately. She handed him the letter. It was from Gregory Holt. He had found her. Or more precisely, he had found the matrimonial news advertisement and traced her marriage through the legal record at Harlan's Crossing, which was a matter of public record, and he was writing to inform her that he still considered her conduct in leaving Ohio without adequate notice to constitute a breach of the informal understanding between them, and that he was planning to travel west in the spring on business matters that would bring him through Nevada territory, and that he would appreciate the opportunity to speak with her personally. The language was civil. The threat was not a threat on the surface. But Ezekiel read between every line and understood exactly what was being communicated, which was that Gregory Holt did not consider this resolved and did not intend to. "He is dangerous," Ezekiel said. "He is careful," Kate said, "which is more dangerous than dangerous." "He cannot come here and make any claim on you," Ezekiel said. "You are legally married." "He knows that," Kate said. "He is not making a legal claim. He is making a social one. He will come here and he will be polite and he will speak to the people in Harlan's Crossing, and he will very carefully, very systematically, begin saying things about me that are difficult to counter without sounding defensive, and over time he will make my position here less stable. He did it in Ohio. He is very good at it." "Then we counter it before he arrives," Ezekiel said. Kate looked at him. "How?" she said. "You have spent 6 months doing work that benefits this town," Ezekiel said. "You have organized the water project. You have treated their children and their fathers and their farmhands. You have a reputation here that is built on real things. What Gregory Holt says about you is an opinion. What you have done here is a fact, Facts outlast opinions. She looked at him with that assessing gaze, and then something in it shifted, and she said very quietly, "You believe that?" "I have learned to build only on things that are real," he said, "because the things that are not real collapse. Your work here is real. He cannot take that." She looked down at the letter. Then she folded it carefully and set it on the table. "There is something else," she said. "He waited. The reason he wanted to marry me," she said. "It was not romantic. Gregory Holt is an intelligent man, and he understood that the cooperative structure I had built was valuable. If he married me, the cooperative leadership would transfer to his household. He would have controlled it through me. 43 farming families, their pricing negotiations, their market access. He wanted the organization. He wanted to own the person who ran it. He wanted to own the work," Ezekiel said. "Yes," she said. "That is why you left." "That is why I could not stay," she said. "I would not watch something I built become a tool for someone else to profit from while I became invisible inside my own work. I have seen that happen to too many women. I would not be next." Ezekiel was very quiet for a moment. "When I wrote that advertisement," he said slowly, "did you think I might be the same, using the arrangement the way he wanted to use marriage?" She met his eyes directly. "Yes," she said, "I thought that was a possibility. But you came anyway." "Because the alternative was him," she said, "and because your advertisement was honest in a way that his courtship never was. You said exactly what you needed. You did not dress it up." "I needed someone to work the land," he said, "not to work for me." "I know that now," she said. They sat looking at each other across the kitchen table with the winter dark outside and the lamp between them, and Ezekiel did something he had not done in years. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked down at his hand. She did not pull away. "He will not take anything from you here," Ezekiel said. "I will not allow it." "I do not need you to protect me," she said, and it was not a rejection because she turned her hand under his so they were palm to palm. "But I am glad you are here." That was December. January brought a harder cold, and the community well drilling project's first real obstacle, which was that the equipment they had rented from a supplier in Carson City arrived damaged, and the replacement cost was going to exceed the community's contribution fund by $40. $40 in 1879 in a small Nevada town was a significant sum, and there was a meeting at the town hall that became heated, with several of the contributing families suggesting that the project was a mistake and they should accept the loss and try to make do with the current well. Kate arrived at the meeting late because she had been delivering a baby on the eastern edge of town, and she came in still wearing her work clothes with the particular composed intensity of someone who had not slept and was running on purpose rather than rest. She listened for 10 minutes to the argument. Then she stood up. "The current well is going to be dry enough to be dangerous within 3 years, she said. "I have the geological calculations here if anyone would like to check them. The equipment repair cost is $40. The cost of abandoning this town when the water fails is everything any of you have built here. I am personally contributing $20, which is money I have earned from my medical practice in this town. I am asking for 20 more from anyone willing to match it." Douglas Carn, who had been watching from his chair with the calculation of a man who had finally decided which way the wind was blowing, stood up and offered 10. 4 other families offered 2 and 3 and 5 between them. The $20 was covered before Kate had sat back down. Ezekiel, sitting beside her, watched the room respond to her and felt something so large and so specific that he finally had to name it to himself, even if he was not ready to name it aloud. He loved her. He had fallen in love with his mail-order wife somewhere between the irrigation survey and the community meeting and the Christmas evening when she had held his hand at the kitchen table. And he was not sure exactly when it had happened, because it had not happened like a single event but like a tide, every day moving a little further up the shore than the day before, until one evening you looked around and you were entirely surrounded by it, and there was no going back to dry land. He loved the way she thought. He loved the precision and the fire of her. He loved the way she protected her feelings with professional composure and then let them out in her work, in the fierceness of her care for people and the absolute refusal to accept that anything was unsolvable. He loved the way she had looked at his broken homestead and seen not disaster but potential. He loved that she had come 900 miles with a plan and a medical bag, and the most formidable will he had ever encountered in any person, man or woman. He did not tell her yet, because he was still not sure she felt the same, and the thing about loving someone who had been used by people who were supposed to love her was that you did not want to be another person making demands of her heart. You wanted to be sure, first, that she was choosing freely. February was cold and clear, and the well drilling made progress that was slow and steady and satisfying in the way of things that are being done correctly. Kate had established a fixed day in town for medical visits on Wednesdays, and she was now seeing between 6 and 12 patients a week, which generated enough income that she had set up a small separate household account that she contributed to the overall homestead finances without being asked. Ezekiel had noticed and had not said anything about it, which Kate eventually found irritating enough to bring up herself. "You have not mentioned the account," she said one evening. "I noticed it," he said. "You have not said anything. It is your money," he said. "You earned it. You chose to contribute it. What is there to say?" She looked at him with the expression he was learning meant that she had expected a different conversation and was adjusting her response to the one actually happening. "Most men would want to manage it," she said. "I am not most men," he said, and there was no pride in it, just fact. "No," she said quietly. "You are not." Gregory Holt arrived in March. He came in on the stage from Elko on a Thursday morning, which Kate knew because she had been alert to the stage schedule since December, and he presented himself at the homestead on Thursday afternoon. He was 42 years old, well-dressed by Nevada standards, with the polished surface of a man accustomed to being impressive in rooms. He was not physically threatening. He was the kind of dangerous that wore a good coat and spoke in measured sentences, and always gave you the technical option of walking away from the conversation while making it practically impossible. Ezekiel answered the door. He had been expecting this visit and had thought through how he wanted to handle it. "Mr. Holt," he said. Gregory Holt introduced himself with the smooth fluency of someone accustomed to first impressions. He said he was an old acquaintance of Kate's from Ohio. He said he was passing through on business and had heard she was living in the area and wanted to pay his respects. "Kate is in town seeing patients," Ezekiel said. "She will be back by late afternoon. You are welcome to wait or you are welcome to come back. Either way, I will let her know you came by." Holt's eyes moved over the homestead behind Ezekiel with the evaluating look of a man pricing what he sees. "Fine property," Holt said. "You have done well out here." "We have done well," Ezekiel said. "My wife has a significant hand in everything you see." The emphasis was deliberate. "My wife." Holt heard it. "Of course," Holt said. "Kate was always capable." "I was glad to hear she had found a suitable situation." "She built the situation," Ezekiel said. "I provided the land. She provided everything else." There was a brief pause in which Gregory Holt recalibrated. "I simply wanted to make sure she was well," he said. "She is excellent," Ezekiel said. "The county's best medical practitioner by any measure, runs the community water project, manages the homestead accounts. We are expecting our busiest growing season yet this spring because of the irrigation system she designed. She is very well, Mr. Holt." Holt looked at him. "I see," he said. "I will tell her you came by," Ezekiel said, and closed the door. When Kate came home that evening, Ezekiel told her immediately. He told her everything Holt had said and everything he had said in return, with no softening and no omission. She listened standing in the kitchen still in her coat. "You told him I designed the irrigation system," she said. "Because you did," he said. "You told him I run the water project." "Because you do." She took her coat off slowly and hung it on the peg beside the door, which was a hook Ezekiel had added to the wall in August because she had needed a place for her coat and there had not been one. "He will go to town tomorrow," she said. "He will talk to people. He will discover that your reputation in this town is built on 6 months of real work," Ezekiel said, "which is what I told you in December. She turned from the coat hook and looked at him. "You are not afraid," she said. "Of Gregory Holt," Ezekiel said. "No. Why not?" "Because he is trying to take something that cannot be taken," Ezekiel said. "Everything he might say about you is an opinion about who you were in Ohio. Everyone in Harlan's Crossing knows who you are here. He cannot reach back 9 months and undo what you have done." She came across the kitchen and stood closer to him than she usually stood, and looked up at him with the open expression he had seen only twice before, once at Christmas and once in the town hall meeting when the $40 had been raised. "Ezekiel," she said. "Kate," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. "When I first arrived," she said, "I was not sure this arrangement was going to be livable. I was prepared to make it functional. I expected it to be practical and tolerable, and I thought that might be enough." "I expected the same," he said. "It is not what happened," she said. "No," he said, "it is not." She put her hand on his arm, the way she had reached for him in small moments over the months, and looked at him with nothing professional in her expression at all, just Kate, direct and honest and uncertain in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I think I am in love with you," she said. "Which I did not expect, and which is possibly the most inconvenient thing that has happened to me in the last several years, and I want you to know that I am not saying it to change the terms of our arrangement. The arrangement works regardless, but I thought you should know." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he put his hand over hers where it rested on his arm. "Kate," he said, "I have been in love with you since sometime in September, and I have been trying to find the right moment to say so without making you feel that I was making a demand." She blinked. "September," she said. "The irrigation channels were finished," he said. "And you were explaining the gravity calculations to me, and you got that particular look you get when something is working the way it is supposed to, and I thought, I would very much like to know this person for the rest of my life." She laughed. It was not a polished laugh or a careful one. It was a sudden, real, surprised laugh that transformed her face entirely, and it was the most beautiful thing Ezekiel Turner had seen in the Nevada desert or anywhere else. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and neither of them was uncertain about it even slightly. Gregory Holt spent 2 days in Harlan's Crossing. He spoke to Douglas Carn at the general store, who by this point was publicly aligned with the water project that Kate had been instrumental in launching, and found no purchase there. He spoke to several townspeople who had been Kate's patients and found, as Ezekiel had predicted, that the specific and real nature of what she had done for them was not impressionable by vague doubts raised by an Ohio businessman who had no history in the territory. On his second day, he came back to the homestead when both Ezekiel and Kate were present. Kate greeted him with exactly the composure and directness she brought to every difficult conversation. "You made this trip unnecessarily," she said, not unkindly. "Whatever you were hoping to accomplish here, the situation is resolved. I have built a life that does not require anything from you, and you cannot reach it from where you are standing." Holt looked at her, and then at Ezekiel, and then at the homestead behind them, the fields in their spring preparation, the repaired barn, the evidence everywhere of something that was working. "You have done well for yourself," he said, and this time it was not an evaluation. It was a concession. "I have done well, period," Kate said. "The situation helped." Gregory Holt left on the Friday stage and did not return. That evening, Kate and Ezekiel sat on the front step of the house in the March cold and watched the stars come out over the Nevada flats, which were vast and clear and absolutely indifferent to human drama. "He is gone," Kate said. "He will not come back," Ezekiel said. "No," she said. She leaned against his shoulder, which was something she had begun doing only recently and which he found he could not imagine doing without. "I want to plant the south field this year," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to talk to you about adding 6 more cattle to the herd. Pete Donovan has offered to stay on as a permanent hand if we can pay him through the winter." "Can afford it if the south field produces," she said, "which it will." "I believe you," he said. She tilted her head to look up at him. "You say that very easily now." "It is easy," he said. "You have given me a great deal of evidence." She smiled, and it was the open smile, the real one, the one he had learned to recognize as Kate when she was not managing anything but simply being. "I want to write to the Federal Land Office in Carson City about expanding the medical program," she said. "There are 3 towns within 40 miles that have no medical practitioner at all. The territory is growing. The need is going to outpace what I can do alone out of Harlan's Crossing." "Write the letter," he said. "It might mean I am away some days," she said. "We will adjust," he said. "You would not mind." "Kate," he said, "you are not a person to be minded. You are a person to be organized around." She laughed again, and the sound of it went out across the desert night. Spring of 1879 was, by any objective measure, the best growing season the Turner homestead had seen. The south field, properly irrigated through the system Kate had designed, produced a wheat crop that exceeded Ezekiel's most optimistic projections by 30%. The cattle herd, expanded with the 6 new animals, was healthy and well managed under Pete Donovan's permanent hand. The homestead accounts, which Kate maintained with the precision she brought to everything, showed a surplus for the first time in 4 years. The community well drilling project, which had faced its last major technical challenge in February, broke through to the underground water source in April, and the town of Harlan's Crossing celebrated with a gathering in the town square that lasted 2 days, and during which Douglas Carn, recognizing the political reality, gave a public speech in which he credited Kate Turner's geological research and organizational work as the driving force behind the project's success. Kate accepted the acknowledgement with grace, and then immediately redirected the conversation to the maintenance protocols the well would require, which was so entirely in character that Ezekiel laughed from the back of the crowd and earned a sharp look from her that he answered with a smile so open and unguarded that the 2 women standing beside him both noticed it and exchanged a look of their own. In May, Kate discovered she was expecting a child. She told Ezekiel in the evening, at the kitchen table, with the directness she applied to everything important. She told him what she knew from her medical training about the likely timeline and the management of a healthy pregnancy in frontier conditions. And then she told him that she intended to continue working throughout the pregnancy at whatever level was medically reasonable, and that she expected him to support that decision. He waited until she had finished the practical portion of the announcement, and then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around her, which surprised her enough that she went still for a moment before her hands came up and held him back. "We are going to have a child," he said, against her hair. "Yes," she said, her voice less steady than usual. "Are you frightened?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, moderately. "So am I," he said. She pulled back to look at him. "Why are you frightened? You are not doing the dangerous part." "Because I want to do this correctly," he said. "I did not have the best example to learn from. My father was not present in ways that mattered. I have been thinking since you told me about what I want to be." She looked at him with the open, unguarded expression. "You are already more present than most men I have known," she said. "You are doing it correctly." He kissed her forehead, and she let out a breath that had something of relief in it. Their son was born in January of 1880 in the homestead kitchen, because Kate had managed her own birth as methodically as everything else, with the assistance of Miriam Holt, who had become a genuine friend over the months and who had been trained by Kate in enough basic medical knowledge to be a competent assistant. They named him Daniel Elias Turner, the Daniel for Miriam's son who had first presented Kate to the town with his broken arm, the Elias for Ezekiel's grandfather who had been, by all accounts, a man of solid character. Daniel was a loud, healthy, substantial baby who arrived in the world with the determined expression of someone who intended to take up space. Ezekiel held him in the hours after the birth with the careful, overwhelmed attention of a man who has just been handed something so valuable that his hands have stopped knowing how to operate normally. Kate watched him from the bed, tired and clean, and more fundamentally content than she had been at any previous point in her life. "You are going to teach him to survey land," she said. "You are going to teach him to read geological surveys," Ezekiel said. "He is going to be brilliant," Kate said. "He is going to be a great deal of work," Ezekiel said. "We are good at work," Kate said. He looked at her over the baby's head, and there was so much in the look that it would have taken longer than either of them had to say it all, so he just said, "Yes, we are." The summer of 1880 brought the formal establishment of what Kate called the Harlan's Crossing Medical and Agricultural Cooperative, which was her translation of the Ohio model into a structure suited to the Nevada Territory's specific needs. It combined the medical outreach program she had been developing for 18 months with a collective purchasing and pricing arrangement for the farming families within 40 miles of the town. It was, in every essential way, a more sophisticated and better structured version of the cooperative she had built in Ohio, and Gregory Holt could not reach it because it was 1,500 miles away from him, and the people who ran it were not in his debt. Ezekiel served as one of the cooperative's board members, which he had not sought and Kate had not pushed, but which the community had asked for because his reputation for honest dealing, built over 7 years of keeping his word on the Nevada flats, made him the right person for the role. He attended meetings with the particular focused attention he brought to anything that mattered and occasionally said things in 3 sentences that redirected an entire discussion. And Kate watched this from across the meeting table with the specific kind of pride she had not known she was capable of until she found someone to be proud of. In 1881, the Nevada Territory's Land Office sent a representative to Harlan's Crossing to assess the homestead's irrigation system as a potential model for a territory-wide program. Kate spent 3 days with the representative, walking the channels and explaining the engineering, and wrote a formal proposal that was submitted to the territory's agricultural board in Carson City. The proposal was accepted in 1882. The Turner irrigation model became the basis for a territory-wide guidance document distributed to homesteaders across Nevada. Kate's name was on the document as the primary author. She came home from Carson City, where she had gone in person to finalize the submission, and found Ezekiel in the south field with Daniel, who was 2 years old and very serious about learning to walk in plowed furrows without falling. She stood at the edge of the field and watched them for a moment before they heard her arrive. Ezekiel was crouched at Daniel's level, showing him something in the soil, his voice low and patient. Daniel was listening with the focused intensity he had clearly inherited from his mother and the stubborn persistence that was entirely his father. Ezekiel looked up and saw her, and the smile that crossed his face was the complete and uncomplicated smile of a man who was standing in the right place. "How did it go?" He called. "They accepted it," she said. He stood up. "Kate." "My name is on the document," she said, and her voice did something that she immediately composed, but not before he had heard it. "It is an official territory document. My name is on it." He came to her across the field, with Daniel toddling determined behind him, and when he reached her he took her face in both hands and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the moment had not already said. She put her hands over his. "Dr. Pembroke would have been pleased," she said. "She would have been stunned," he said, "and then she would have told you that you should have done it 5 years earlier." Kate laughed, and the laugh caught in something deeper and her eyes went bright, and Ezekiel held her while Daniel arrived at their feet and grabbed both their ankles with his small, determined hands, which was his current preferred method of asserting presence. In the spring of 1883, their second child was born. Another boy, which surprised Kate in a way she hadn't fully expected, and she named him James Harriet Turner, the Harriet a quiet and private tribute to Dr. Pembroke, which Ezekiel had suggested himself when she was considering names, and which had made her cry in a way she did not try to suppress. James was quieter than Daniel and more observant, with a particular quality of attention that made strangers feel He was evaluating them very carefully before deciding what he thought, which Kate recognized as a quality she had spent years trying to conceal in herself, and which, in her son, she thought was wonderful. By 1884, the Turner homestead was not the solitary, half-failing enterprise that Ezekiel had been battling alone in 1877. It was a productive operation with a functioning irrigation system, a healthy cattle herd, two permanent hands who respected both Ezekiel's land knowledge and Kate's overall authority in the enterprise's direction, a wheat crop that had established itself as among the best quality in the eastern Nevada market, and a household account that was solidly in the positive for the 6th consecutive year. Kate's medical practice had expanded formally into a 2-day-per-week operation in Harlan's Crossing, and a monthly circuit of the 3 neighboring towns she had identified in 1879, assisted now by a young woman named Sophie Archer, who had come to her 2 years earlier asking to learn what Kate knew because Sophie's mother had died of a fever that Kate believed could have been treated with available methods if anyone in the area had known them. Sophie Archer was 22 and stubborn in exactly the way that useful people are stubborn, and Kate taught her with the same focused intentionality that Dr. Pembroke had used, giving her real responsibility and real feedback, and never softening the work to make it feel easier than it was. Ezekiel watched Kate teaching Sophie with the specific warmth of a man who understands that he is watching something important happen. One evening after Sophie had gone home, he said, "You are building what Dr. Pembroke built." Kate was washing her instruments. "I am building something larger," she said, "because I have better resources and a less hostile environment." Harlan's Crossing is not Columbus, Ohio in 1875. "Because you changed it," he said. She considered this. "We changed it," she said. "The water project was both of us. The cooperative was both of us. The reputation of this homestead is both of us. I would not have had the foundation to do any of it without the land and the standing you had already built. And I would have lost the land within 2 more years without the irrigation system," he said. "So perhaps we should simply agree that it was both of us." "Agreed," she said. She dried her hands and turned from the basin and found him very close, which was not unusual anymore, the careful physical distance of their first months having long since collapsed into something that felt as natural as breathing. "What are you thinking about?" she said. "The summer of 1877, he said. "Writing that advertisement." "What I imagined when I wrote it." "What did you imagine?" "Someone who would work hard and not ask too much," he said. "Someone who would make the load lighter without complicating the rest of it." "I complicated everything," she said. "Yes," he said. "You complicated everything in the most thorough and irreversible and necessary way possible." She looked at him with the open smile. "You asked for a hard worker," she said. "I had no idea what hard work actually looked like," he said, "until you arrived and showed me." She moved toward him and he met her halfway, and the kiss they shared in that kitchen in the summer evening of 1884 had 7 years of complexity and labor and argument and laughter and grief and pride in it. And it was better than anything either of them had imagined when they had each, separately and in desperation, agreed to an arrangement they hoped would be tolerable. It was not tolerable. It was extraordinary. In the fall of 1884, a letter arrived from the newly organizing Nevada Territory Agricultural Society, requesting that Kate Turner deliver a presentation at their winter conference in Carson City on the irrigation modeling project and its broader application to drought management in the territory. The letter was addressed to her professionally and specifically, and it referred to her as the leading agricultural innovation practitioner in eastern Nevada. Ezekiel read it over her shoulder at the kitchen table and then set it down. "You should go," he said. "I will need 3 days," she said. "Daniel and James, Pete Donovan and Miriam Holt have offered before," he said. "The boys know them." "I can manage 3 days," she looked at the letter. "They want me to speak publicly," she said, "at a formal conference." "Yes," he said. "The last time I tried to speak in any formal capacity in Columbus, Gregory Holt ensured I was removed from the organization I had founded, she said. This is not Columbus, he said. And this is not an organization someone else controls. This is the Nevada Territory Agricultural Society formally requesting Kate Turner, by name based on her work, to address their conference. And if anyone in that room says anything that suggests she does not belong there, she will dismantle their objection with geological survey data and actual harvest figures, and they will not recover. She stared at the letter for another moment. Then she picked up a pen and wrote the acceptance. The Carson City Conference was in December of 1884. Kate went alone, by stage, with her presentation materials organized into a leather portfolio that Ezekiel had bought for her in Harlan's Crossing, and she stood up in front of 63 agricultural professionals, landowners, territorial government representatives, and practical farmers, and she spoke for 40 minutes about water management, soil irrigation, cooperative economic structures, and the specific conditions of eastern Nevada that had shaped the Turner homestead's approach. She was the only woman presenting. She was not the only woman in the room, but she was the only one presenting, and she was aware of this, and acknowledged it at the outset with the particular directness she had always preferred to pretense. She said that she had arrived in Nevada Territory in 1878 as a mail-order bride, and had designed the irrigation system on her husband's homestead within her first month, because the problem was visible and solvable, and there was no logical reason not to solve it. She said that the specific contribution of practical women to frontier agricultural development was systematically undercounted in formal records, and that she intended to be counted, clearly and with documentation, and that the documentation was in the portfolio she was about to distribute. The room was very quiet for a moment. And then one of the farmers in the third row, an older man with the weathered face of someone who had been fighting Nevada land for 20 years, said, "How deep were the channels?" And she told him, precisely and in technical detail, and the room leaned forward, and the presentation became a discussion, and the discussion ran 40 minutes past the scheduled time because the questions did not stop. When she came home 3 days later, Daniel ran to the wagon before it stopped moving, and James followed with his characteristic careful deliberation, and Ezekiel was standing at the porch with the expression she had come to know as his particular brand of contained happiness, which was not demonstrative but was entirely genuine. "How did it go?" he said. "2 of the Eastern County land agents have already written requesting consultation visits," she said, climbing down from the wagon with Daniel attached to her arm and James now at her knee. "Consultation visits to the homestead," he said. "To the homestead," she said. "They want to see the irrigation system in person," he smiled. "I will need to fix the gate on the south field," he said. "It has been uneven since August." "I noticed," she said. "I was going to mention it." "You were giving me time to notice it myself," he said. "You have been busy," she said. He took her bag and James from her simultaneously, one in each hand, and kissed her, and Daniel made the sound of loud and theatrical disgust that was his current preferred response to parental affection. "Daniel," Kate said. "It is disgusting," Daniel said. "It is love," Kate said. "You will feel differently in about 15 years. "I will never feel differently," Daniel said with the absolute conviction of a 4-year-old. "We will discuss it in 15 years, Ezekiel said. The consultation visits from the Eastern County land agents happened in March of 1885, and they were followed by 2 more from the Territorial Agricultural Board itself. And by June of 1885, the Turner homestead had been formally designated as a model agricultural site by the Nevada Territory, which entitled them to a modest government grant for infrastructure maintenance, and made the irrigation system a matter of official territorial record. Kate had insisted that the designation acknowledge the system's dual authorship, by which she meant that the territory's documentation would state that the design was hers, and the implementation was a joint enterprise, which was accurate, and which the territorial board had initially drafted incorrectly as Ezekiel's project with Kate's assistance, and which she had corrected in writing before signing the designation agreement, and which the board had ultimately accepted because her technical documentation was too thorough to argue with. In the summer of 1885, Sophie Archer delivered her first baby without Kate's direct assistance, with another woman trained by Sophie in basic obstetrics, and the birth went smoothly. Sophie wrote Kate a letter afterward that was formal and then became suddenly personal at the end, where she wrote that she thought about Dr. Pembroke when she worked, and that she thought Kate probably did too, and that she wanted Kate to know that what had been given to Kate was not ending with her. Kate read the letter at the kitchen table in the evening and cried quietly, without performance, and Ezekiel sat beside her and did not say anything because this was not a moment that required anything to be said. By 1886, Harlan's Crossing had grown from a town of 300 to a town of just over 500 people, driven partly by the reliability of its water supply and partly by the cooperative structure that had stabilized the agricultural economy of the surrounding area sufficiently to attract new settlers. The Turner homestead was known throughout the eastern Nevada agricultural community. Kate's name was in the territorial record as both a medical practitioner and an agricultural innovator, which was a genuinely unusual combination for 1886, and which she regarded with satisfaction but not surprise, because she had never doubted that both things were possible simultaneously. Daniel, at 6 years old, was learning to read with the focused determination of someone who has understood that the books his mother keeps are important and wants access to what is in them. James, at 3, had developed a particular interest in animals that expressed itself as an imperious and tender authority over every creature on the homestead, which the chickens resented and the cattle appeared to accept. One evening in the fall of 1886, Kate and Ezekiel sat on the porch in the cooling air after the boys were asleep, in the companionable silence that had become one of the things she valued most about their life together. The Nevada sky was doing what it did in autumn, spreading out in a darkness so clear and so vast it seemed to be making a statement. "Do you remember the letter?" Kate said. "Which letter?" he said, though he knew. "The advertisement," she said. "The one I answered. You wanted someone who could work hard." "I had no idea," he said. "No idea what?" she said. "What hard work actually meant," he said. "I thought I did. I thought I had been doing it for 4 years. And then you arrived and I realized that I had been confusing hard work with survival, which is a narrower thing. Hard work is what you did, building something that lasts beyond the work itself." She looked at the stars. "I had no idea either," she said. "About what?" "What it would feel like to do the work in a place where I was allowed to do it," she said. "Where the work was mine and the results were mine and the record was mine. I thought I was coming here for safety, for a situation I could control. I did not know I was coming here to find out what I was capable of when the only person setting the limits was me." He turned to look at her. "And what are you capable of?" he said. She looked back at him, and in the expression that crossed her face was the full inventory of everything they had built, the field and the channels and the well and the cooperative and the medical practice, and the 2 boys sleeping inside, and the years of table conversations, and the 100 small decisions that had added up to a life that was real and specific and entirely theirs. "More than I had imagined," she said. He reached for her hand in the dark, and she laced her fingers through his, and they sat together in the Nevada night, with everything they had built spread out around them, and neither of them needed to say what they were both feeling because it was already present in every detail of the place they had made from what might have been nothing. In the spring of 1887, Kate discovered she was expecting their 3rd child. She was 37 years old, which was not without medical risk, and she knew this better than anyone and managed the pregnancy with the careful attention she brought to all medical matters, including her own. She continued her work through most of the pregnancy, reducing the circuit visits by the 7th month but maintaining her Harlan's crossing practice until nearly the end. Sophie Archer had by this point developed into a fully capable practitioner who needed less and less of Kate's direct guidance and more of her mentorship, which was a different kind of involvement, more strategic and less immediate, and Kate found it satisfying in a new way. The child arrived in October of 1887, a girl. They named her Harriet Eliza Turner, the Harriet for Dr. Pembroke claimed now openly and without the quiet privacy of the earlier tribute, because Kate had decided that the daughter deserved to carry the name proudly rather than secretly. The Eliza for Kate's mother, who had died when Kate was 14, and whom she had missed in specific and particular ways for 23 years. Harriet was small and fierce, and had Ezekiel's gray eyes and Kate's particular quality of assessing every room she entered before deciding what she thought about it. Ezekiel held her in the lamplight of the kitchen with Daniel and James crowded against his sides, Daniel serious and solemn in the way he was about important things, James reaching out one careful finger to touch the baby's hand. "She is very small," James said. "She will grow," Kate said from the bed. "She has your eyes," Daniel said to his father. "She has your mother's determination," Ezekiel said. "You can see it already." Kate laughed, which she should not have, given that she had just given birth but could not help. "You cannot see determination on a 3-hour-old baby," she said. "I can see it on this one," Ezekiel said. He brought Harriet to Kate, and the boys arranged themselves on the bed beside their mother with the careful deliberateness of children who understand that something important is happening, and Ezekiel sat on the edge of the bed and looked at all of them, and the look on his face was so unguarded and so complete that Kate reached up and put her hand against his jaw. "Ezekiel," she said. "I know," he said. She smiled. "You know what I was going to say. You were going to say something about the extraordinary nature of the moment," he said. "Or possibly about how you did not anticipate this when you wrote your response to the advertisement in the matrimonial news." "Neither of those things," she said. "What then?" "I was going to say that I have never been more glad of anything than I am glad to be here," she said, "with you, on this land, in this life." He covered her hand with his own where it rested against his jaw. "Neither have I," he said. Daniel, who had limited tolerance for parental sentiment but had been behaving very well given the circumstances, said, "She is making a face." "She is sleeping," Kate said. "She looks like she disagrees with something," Daniel said. "She is 3 hours old," James said, with the gravity of a 5-year-old explaining the obvious. "She is already practicing," Ezekiel said, and Kate laughed again. And Harriet, as if in response to the sound of her mother's laughter, made a small and contented sound of her own. In 1889, Nevada achieved statehood, and Kate Turner's name appeared in the official territorial-to-state transition documentation as a designated contributor to the Nevada Territory Agricultural Development Record, which meant that her work was formally entered into the state's founding documentation. She received a letter from the new State Agricultural Board in Carson City, informing her of this, and inviting her to a formal ceremony in November. She attended with Ezekiel, leaving the children with Miriam Holt, and stood in a room full of men who had built Nevada and was recognized among them, specifically and by name, for what she had built. On the journey home, in the stage rattling back across the eastern Nevada flats in the November dark, she leaned her head on Ezekiel's shoulder and felt the permanence of what had been done, not just the ceremony but everything behind it and everything still ahead. 900 miles, she said. What? He said, "That was how far I traveled to answer your advertisement," she said. 900 miles from Columbus, Ohio. "Was it worth it?" he said. She lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him in the dark of the stage. This man who had sent for a wife who could work hard, who had stood in his doorway in the Nevada summer and found something he had not known he was looking for, who had given her land to build on and then stepped back and watched her build, who had never tried to be Gregory Holt and had not needed to be told not to because it was not in him, who had become her partner in every sense of that word. Equal and specific and entirely irreplaceable. Every mile, she said. He pulled her close and she settled against him, and the stage rolled east across the Nevada dark, carrying them back to the homestead where their children were sleeping, and the south field was dormant under the winter sky, and the irrigation channels they had built together were resting, ready for the spring, when the water would move again through the work of their hands, and the land would produce what land produces when it is tended by people who refuse to let it fail. The Turner homestead stood on the eastern Nevada flats for many years after that, and the people who knew it came to know it first as the place with the good wheat and the reliable water, and then as the place where the woman had designed the irrigation system and organized the cooperative, and then simply as the Turner place, which in that part of Nevada came to mean a thing done properly, a thing built to last. Ezekiel Turner grew older on his land and did not regret a single acre of it. He learned, over the years, to let things be unpredictable without flinching, because living with Kate had taught him that unpredictability was mostly just a word for possibility that had not yet arranged itself into a recognizable shape. Kate Turner practiced medicine until 1901, and then supervised Sophie Archer's practice, and then wrote a manual of frontier medical practice that the state distributed to homesteading communities across Nevada, and which the University of Nevada referenced in 1908 in their first formal medical training program, and which had her name on the cover in plain letters. Daniel Turner went to the University of Nevada in 1892 to study engineering, specializing in water and irrigation systems. James Turner stayed on the homestead and became the best cattle manager in the eastern counties. Harriet Turner, fierce and gray-eyed and possessed of the most specific and undeniable determination any of her teachers had ever encountered, became a physician in 1910, one of the first formally credentialed women physicians in Nevada, and she said, when asked who had inspired her, that her mother had shown her what medicine was, and her father had shown her what it meant to give someone the space to become what they were capable of being. Ezekiel and Kate sat on the porch of the homestead they had built together in the evenings until they were old, in the companionable silence that had been the best conversation they had ever known how to have, and the Nevada sky spread out above them enormous and clear and absolute, the same sky it had always been, indifferent to everything except the fact that it was there, which was the only fact that mattered. He had sent for a wife who could work hard. She had arrived and redrawn the entire map of what was possible on that land, in that town, in that territory, and finally in that state, and she had done it without apology and without permission, and with the absolute certainty of someone who had known all along that the work was real, that the work was hers, and that the only thing she had ever needed was a place to do it. She had found the place. She had found the person, and the person had found her right back.